So you really want to understand how India is approaching climate change, as they try to reach their goal of becoming a developed nation by 2047,
Yeah.
while also reaching net zero emissions by 27.
Yeah, an ambitious goal.
Right. We're going to be taking a deep dive into Chapter 6 of the Economic Survey of India 2023-24.
Okay.
It's called Climate Change and Energy Transition,
Oh.
dealing with trade-offs. And it really gets right to the heart of how India can balance these two goals,
Yeah, right.
becoming a developed nation and reaching net zero.
It's a really interesting chapter to dive into.
Yeah. What to start with?
Well, it starts with a pretty thought-provoking critique of like the global climate action strategy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So like what's the
It almost feels like the world is realizing that this, like, no matter the cost to hit climate targets, might not be the best way forward.
Yeah.
And they highlight instances like the UK delaying their ban on petrol and diesel vehicles, and also Germany's softening its stance on fossil fuel boilers, due to economic pressures.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they're saying,
Right.
hey, maybe we need to be a bit more realistic about how we do this whole transition thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And the chapter also brings in this really interesting quote from Mike Holm, where he suggests that exceeding the 2 degrees Celsius warming target might actually lead to a better outcome for human well-being and even ecological integrity than rigidly sticking to the 1.5 degree goal at all costs.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
It seems to challenge the prevailing narrative around these climate targets.
Yeah. The chapter also argues that kind of forcefully pushing for rapid emission cuts could actually hinder developing countries, especially those experiencing rapid economic growth.
So finding that balance between addressing climate change, but also ensuring people's well-being, particularly in countries working to improve their standards of living.
Yeah, exactly. And the chapter also points out a bit of a disconnect between the rhetoric and the reality of global climate action.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
Developed nations are urging developing countries to cut emissions drastically while simultaneously increasing their own energy demands.
So there's a bit of a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's an example in the chapter about that, right?
Is there?
Yeah, it mentions a Goldman Sachs report highlighting the surge in U.S. power demand, fueled in part by the rise of AI. It suggests that while the conversation is focused on emission cuts, the actual energy consumption in developed nations tells a very different story.
I see, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does India fit into all of this?
Right. Well, India is in a unique position. It's one of the fastest growing economies globally.
Right.
Yet its per capita emissions are significantly lower than the global average.
So that's kind of a stark contrast.
Yeah, it really is. And the chapter underscores India's commitment to both economic development and environmental sustainability.
So they're trying to find that balance.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it details the progress that's been made under the National Action Plan on Climate Change, like exceeding targets for non-fossil fuel energy capacity.
Okay, so they're actually like walking the walk and not just talking the talk.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
The chapter also highlights that in 2024, 45.4% of India's power capacity came from non-fossil fuel sources.
Wow.
Compared to just 32% in 2014.
That's huge.
It's a big jump.
Yeah.
And they've also managed to reduce the emission intensity of their GDP.
So making good progress there.
Yeah.
But I imagine that's not without its challenges.
Definitely. The chapter dives into the complexities of India's energy transition.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to meet a projected 2 to 2.5 times increase in energy needs by 2047 while simultaneously shifting towards a low-carbon pathway.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. It's a real challenge.
Where do they even start?
Right. Well, let's break down India's current energy mix.
Okay.
Right now, it's dominated by fossil fuels, which make up about 84%.
It's a lot of work to do there.
A lot of work to do to shift away from that.
Yeah.
However, there has been a significant push towards renewables in the electricity sector.
Okay.
And there are some really interesting initiatives promoting this shift, like the PM Surya Ghar Yojana, which is focused on rooftop solar installations.
I see.
The National Offshore Wind Energy Policy, and the Green Hydrogen Mission.
Yeah, green hydrogen is getting a lot of attention these days, but the chapter mentioned some hurdles there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
What are some of those?
Well, cost is a major barrier.
Yeah, of course.
Producing green hydrogen relies on renewable energy, which itself can be expensive, and the process of electrolysis to create it is energy intensive. There's also the issue of intermittent renewable energy sources. You can't produce green hydrogen if the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
Yeah, exactly.
And those renewable energy installations require large amounts of land.
So green hydrogen, while promising, not a quick fix.
Oh, it's not a silver bullet.
Okay, yeah.
And the chapter also acknowledges that coal remains a crucial energy source for India right now.
Which seems to kind of contradict the global push to phase it out completely?
Right.
Okay.
But the chapter suggests a more nuanced approach, highlighting initiatives like the coal gasification mission and carbon capture technologies that could potentially make coal cleaner and more sustainable.
So rather than abandoning it altogether, they're looking for ways to make it less harmful.
Exactly. They're looking at ways to kind of make it work within their context.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And it emphasizes this need for practicality and finding solutions that fit India's specific circumstances. Not just adopting blanket policies that might not be feasible or even beneficial in their context.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about energy efficiency? Is that part of the conversation?
Oh, absolutely. The chapter talks about demand-side management strategies, like the Perform, Achieve, and Trade scheme, also known as PAT.
Got it.
Which incentivizes industries to reduce their energy consumption.
Okay.
And this scheme has led to significant energy savings and emission reductions.
Wow.
There's even a fascinating case study mentioned about Navanagar, a village in Gujarat, where community-driven water management and the adoption of micro-irrigation transformed a water-scarce area into a water-sufficient one.
Like a really good example of how local solutions can have a huge impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like all of this would be incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
How's India planning to fund this massive energy transition?
Well, that's a crucial question. And the chapter doesn't shy away from the hefty price tag. An estimated $250 billion per year until 2047.
Wow.
That's a staggering amount of money.
So where's all that funding going to come from?
Well, the chapter points to a mix of domestic resources and efforts to attract private capital.
Okay.
And there are several initiatives underway to make India a more enticing destination for green investors.
Like what?
Things like the issuance of sovereign green bonds.
I see.
And the introduction of more stringent sustainability reporting requirements for listed companies.
Okay.
Thanks to the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI.
So they're essentially trying to create a more favorable environment for green finance.
Exactly. But the chapter also acknowledges the challenges, like limited financial market depth and the vulnerability of developing countries' debt profiles.
Right.
These are definitely significant hurdles to overcome.
Yeah, I'm also curious about this carbon credit trading scheme that they mentioned.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
That's India's system for putting a price on carbon emissions.
I see.
It's a big step.
So it's designed to encourage companies to lower their emissions.
That's right. It's a market-based mechanism where companies are given specific emission intensity targets.
Okay.
And if they exceed those targets, they earn carbon credit certificates that can then be traded.
Okay.
But if they fail to meet those targets, they need to buy these certificates.
It's kind of like a cap and trade system.
Very similar. The goal is to create a financial incentive for businesses to invest in cleaner technologies and reduce their carbon footprint.
And the chapter also talks about a voluntary carbon market.
Yeah.
How is that different?
So the voluntary carbon market, or VCM, is a bit less regulated.
Okay.
It allows entities to offset their emissions by investing in emission reduction projects elsewhere.
Okay.
For example, a company in India could invest in a reforestation project in another country to offset its own emissions.
That sounds like a good way to support emission reduction efforts globally. But are there any potential downsides to this approach?
Yeah, the chapter raises some valid concerns. There's the risk of double counting, where both the investor and the project developer claim credit for the same emission reductions.
I see, yeah.
Yeah. It also questions how these voluntary offsets impact a country's overall emission reduction commitments under the Paris Agreement.
So transparency and regulations are going to be key.
Absolutely, yeah. Without those, it's really difficult to ensure that these offsets translate into real and measurable emission reductions.
Yeah. Okay. So the chapter also highlights India's role on the global stage when it comes to climate action.
Right.
It mentioned some initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, One Sun, One World, One Grid, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure.
Right.
What can you tell us about those?
Well, it seems that India is taking a really proactive and collaborative approach to tackling climate change globally. The International Solar Alliance, or ISA, is a great example. It's a treaty-based organization with over 100 member countries, primarily those located between the Tropics of Cancer and Capricorn.
Okay.
Their goal is to mobilize $1 trillion in investments for solar energy projects by 2030.
$1 trillion?
Yeah.
That's a massive goal.
It's a huge goal.
How are they planning to achieve that?
Well, the ISA focuses on encouraging private sector investment building capacity within member countries and working to reduce the cost of adopting solar technology.
So they're acting as a facilitator.
Right.
And a knowledge-sharing platform to accelerate the deployment of solar energy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just about providing aid, it's about empowering countries to develop their own solar energy capabilities.
I see, yeah. What about this One Sun, One Grid initiative? That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, this one's a truly ambitious vision. Led by India and the UK.
What is it?
Imagine a world where solar energy systems are interconnected on a global scale, creating this massive grid that harnesses the power of the sun 2047. That's the idea behind Asawag.
Oh, wow.
The goal is to capture solar energy wherever the sun is shining and transmit it efficiently to areas with high energy demand, regardless of time zones.
So it's like a global energy system, all powered by the sun.
Exactly. It's a phased implementation with the initial focus on connecting the Indian grid to the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia.
I see.
The ultimate ambition is to create a truly interconnected global grid by 2050.
Wow, that's really forward-thinking. Now tell me more about the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Why is that so crucial in the context of climate change?
Well, this initiative, known as CDRI, focuses on making infrastructure more resistant to the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. It's a global partnership involving governments, UN agencies, development banks, the private sector, and academic institutions, all working together to strengthen infrastructure and protect communities from climate-related risks.
So why is this so important?
Well, we're already seeing an increase in extreme weather events like floods, droughts, heat waves, and cyclones due to climate change.
Right.
And these events can devastate infrastructure, cripple economies, and pose serious threats to human lives.
Yeah.
CDRI is all about building back better, not just rebuilding what's been lost. They work on capacity building, policy development, and knowledge sharing to help countries integrate disaster resilience into their infrastructure planning and management.
So they're being proactive rather than reactive. Are there any specific examples of their work?
Yeah, they've been particularly active in supporting small island developing states, or SIDs, which are especially vulnerable to climate change impacts. In fact, they've launched a dedicated initiative called the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, or IRIS, to help these countries develop more robust and climate-resilient infrastructure.
That's really important work. It seems like India is stepping up as a leader in global climate action, not just focusing on its own domestic efforts, but also working collaboratively to find solutions that benefit everyone.
Exactly. They're demonstrating that developing nations can be at the forefront of these initiatives, contributing their expertise and innovative solutions to the global effort to address climate change.
So zooming back in on India itself, the chapter also delves into the specifics of their energy transition strategy. We've already talked about the challenges of integrating renewable energy sources, especially the issue of intermittency. The fact that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. What are some of the solutions that India is exploring to address this?
Well, the chapter discusses a really interesting approach. Round-the-clock, or RTC, renewable energy supply contracts.
What is that?
These contracts are designed to overcome that intermittency challenge by requiring power producers to provide a consistent and reliable supply of energy regardless of weather conditions.
So it's not just about generating solar or wind power when it's available. But about ensuring that there's a steady flow of electricity even when those sources are intermittent.
Exactly. And to achieve this, RTC contracts typically involve integrating energy storage solutions into the mix.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of relying solely on solar panels or wind turbines, these contracts kind of bundle them with battery storage systems or other storage technologies to ensure that continuous supply.
That makes a lot of sense. Are these RTC contracts actually being used in India?
Yes. They are. The chapter provides examples of recent auctions for RTC power with tariffs ranging from around 4 to 6 rupees per kilowatt hour.
Wow.
This shows that there's a real market emerging for this type of reliable, renewable energy.
That's encouraging, but I imagine there are still challenges
Oh, of course.
to overcome with this approach.
Yeah, the chapter acknowledges that managing the dynamic energy demands of a rapidly growing economy like India's adds complexity to designing effective RTC solutions. Coordinating multiple renewable energy projects and securing transmission access across different states are also significant hurdles.
And of course, the cost of these energy storage technologies remains a factor.
Absolutely. The chapter highlights the upfront costs associated with battery storage systems, the dependence on critical minerals with potentially volatile supply chains, and the relatively short lifespan of these systems compared to traditional power plants. These are all factors that need to be addressed for RTC solutions to become more widespread and affordable.
So it's a step in the right direction, but still a work in progress. What about other energy sources? The chapter mentioned green hydrogen as potentially a very transformative fuel for the future.
Right.
What are some of the key hurdles to making that a reality?
Well, green hydrogen is definitely generating a lot of buzz.
Yeah.
But the chapter doesn't shy away from the challenges. Cost is a major obstacle. Producing green hydrogen, which uses renewable energy to power the electrolysis process, is significantly more expensive than producing hydrogen from fossil fuels.
Yeah, I imagine. So bringing down the cost of production is going to be crucial.
Absolutely.
If we want to see widespread adoption of green hydrogen.
Exactly. And that means driving down the cost of renewable energy itself.
Okay.
Improving the efficiency of electrolyzers.
Right.
And finding ways to transport and store hydrogen safely and cost-effectively. These are all areas where innovation and technological advancements are really needed.
Yeah. Are there any other challenges to consider?
Yes, the chapter highlights the need for a robust and dedicated infrastructure to support the use of green hydrogen. Think pipelines, storage facilities, and refueling stations, all designed specifically for handling hydrogen.
Wow.
It also mentions the need for research and development to adapt existing industrial processes to use hydrogen as a fuel source.
So it's not just about producing the green hydrogen.
Yeah.
It's about creating a whole ecosystem to support its use and integration into our energy systems.
Exactly. And that requires substantial investment coordination across different sectors and a long-term vision for the role of hydrogen in India's energy future.
Wow. The chapter seems to present a pretty comprehensive picture of India's approach to climate change and energy transition.
Yeah.
They're exploring a range of energy sources, from cleaner coal technologies to cutting-edge renewable solutions like we talked about green hydrogen.
Right.
There's a strong focus on energy efficiency and finding ways to manage demand.
Yeah.
And they're taking a leadership role in these international collaborations to address climate change on a global scale. Given all of this, does the chapter ultimately express optimism or pessimism about India's ability to balance its development goals with its climate commitments?
I would say it strikes a cautiously optimistic tone. You know, it acknowledges the enormity of the challenges, but also highlights the significant progress India has already made.
Yeah.
And it recognizes that finding a truly sustainable path will require a pragmatic and adaptable approach, constantly adjusting to new technologies, shifting global dynamics, and the evolving needs of a rapidly developing nation.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not about sticking to a single plan, but about being flexible. Innovative and responsive to the complexities of this transition.
Exactly. And the chapter makes a point of emphasizing the importance of global cooperation. Particularly the responsibility of developed nations to support developing countries in their energy transition efforts. It argues that a one-size-fits-all approach to climate change simply won't work.
Of course.
And that each country's unique circumstances and development needs must be taken into account.
So it's a call for a more nuanced and collaborative approach to global climate policy.
I think that's a fair interpretation. The chapter seems to push back against the idea that there's only one right way to address climate change. It emphasizes the importance of considering each country's unique circumstances and development needs.
And after all, India has a huge population to lift out of poverty. And that requires economic growth.
Exactly. And the chapter highlights the fact that India's per capita emissions are still significantly lower than those of developed countries.
Right.
It also acknowledges that India is already taking significant steps towards a cleaner energy future.
Okay.
But it needs access to affordable finance and technology to achieve its ambitious goals.
Which brings us back to that point about the responsibility of developed nations to support developing countries in this transition.
Exactly. The chapter doesn't shy away from highlighting that responsibility.
Okay.
It points out that developed countries, having relied on fossil fuels for their own development, now expect developing countries to leapfrog to cleaner energy sources without adequate financial or technological support.
And that's where initiatives like the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure come in.
Exactly. Those initiatives demonstrate India's commitment to collaborating with other countries to find solutions that benefit everyone. The chapter also mentions India's efforts to create a more attractive environment for green investment domestically, with things like the sovereign green bonds and new sustainability reporting requirements for companies.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. Domestic action, international collaboration, and creating the right conditions for a private investment.
Exactly. And it's all underpinned by the idea of finding a path to sustainable development that works for India's specific needs and circumstances.
The chapter also spends quite a bit of time discussing some of the more specific policies and schemes India has implemented to promote sustainable practices. For instance, it highlights the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, or PMKSY, and the National Innovations on Climate Resilient Agriculture, or NICRA. Why are those initiatives so important?
These programs are crucial because they address the impacts of climate change on agriculture, a sector that's vital to India's economy and food security. The PMKSY focuses on improving irrigation systems and water management to enhance agricultural productivity, while the NICRA promotes research and development of climate-resilient crop varieties and farming techniques.
So it's about helping farmers adapt to the changing climate.
Exactly.
And ensuring food security for a growing population. The chapter also mentions the importance of conserving wetlands and mangroves.
Absolutely. It highlights India's success in designating new Ramsar sites, which are wetlands of international importance recognized for their ecological value. These ecosystems play a vital role in protecting coastal areas from storms and floods, supporting biodiversity, and providing livelihoods for local communities.
And to incentivize those conservation efforts, they've introduced the Amrit Dharohar initiative, encouraging nature tourism in those protected areas.
That's a really smart way to promote both conservation and economic opportunities, creating a win-win situation for both the environment and local communities.
Another area that the chapter delves into is the issue of critical minerals and the challenges they pose in this transition to a clean energy future. Why is this such a critical concern?
Well, the global push for renewable energy technologies and electric vehicles has created a surge in demand for critical minerals, like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, which are essential components in batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines.
Yeah, and the chapter points out that the supply chains for many of these minerals are concentrated in a handful of countries.
Exactly. It highlights the example of rare earth elements, which are crucial for things like magnets used in wind turbines and electric motors. China currently dominates the production and processing of these elements, which raises concerns about potential supply chain disruptions, price volatility, and geopolitical tensions.
So it's a strategic issue as well as an environmental one.
Absolutely. And the chapter discusses India's multi-pronged strategy to mitigate those risks. It involves joining international partnerships like the Mineral Security Partnership to diversify supply chains and reduce dependence on any single source.
So it's about securing access to those vital resources, while also promoting responsible sourcing practices.
Exactly. And the chapter also highlights India's efforts to boost domestic exploration and production of critical minerals. It mentions the work of Khanij Bidesh India Limited, or KABIL, a joint venture company focused on acquiring and developing strategic minerals overseas.
So it's a combination of international collaboration and domestic action to secure a stable and sustainable supply of these essential resources.
Exactly. And it underscores that the transition to a clean energy future will require careful planning, strategic partnerships, and a recognition of the complex geopolitical and economic implications of this shift.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
From the global political landscape of climate action to the intricacies of India's energy transition strategy. We've looked at policy initiatives,
Right.
technological innovations,
Yeah.
and even those inspiring grassroots movements aimed at fostering a more sustainable future. But before we wrap up, there's one final aspect of the chapter I want to touch on.
What's that?
It's the discussion of the Green Credit Program and the EcoMark scheme.
Okay.
These seem like really innovative approaches to encouraging sustainable practices beyond just government policies and regulations.
You're right. These programs are part of India's mission life, which aims to create a mass movement for sustainable living.
So it's about moving beyond government policies and regulations and empowering individuals and communities to take action.
Exactly. The Green Credit Program, or GCP, is designed to incentivize individuals, communities, and companies to participate in activities that benefit the environment.
How does it work?
The chapter explains that the GCP will issue green credits as rewards for engaging in these activities. The initial focus is on tree plantation on degraded land.
Okay.
But it's expected to expand to other areas in the future.
So it's like a points-based system for environmental action.
You could think of it that way. The credits can be earned and potentially traded or used to access certain benefits.
Interesting. What about the EcoMark scheme? What's that about?
The EcoMark is a labeling scheme for products and services that meet certain environmental standards. It's designed to help consumers make more sustainable choices.
So if I see a product with the EcoMark,
Right.
I can be confident that it has a lower environmental impact.
That's the idea. It's a way to signal to consumers which products are more sustainable and encourage companies to adopt greener practices.
These programs seem to be in line with the chapter's emphasis on finding ways to promote sustainable lifestyles and make environmental action more accessible and rewarding for everyone.
I agree. And it's interesting to note that India shared its green credit program with other countries at COP28, inviting them to join a global green credit initiative. It seems like they're positioning themselves as a leader in this space, promoting innovative approaches to encouraging sustainable behaviors on a global scale.
That's a really inspiring example of how a country like India can contribute to shaping the global conversation on climate action and sustainable development. It's not just about following the lead of developed nations, but about forging their own path and sharing their experiences and innovations with the world.
And it's a powerful reminder that addressing climate change requires a collective effort, with all countries working together to find solutions that are both effective and equitable.
Okay, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground from the global political landscape of climate action to the specific challenges and opportunities facing India. We've looked at policy initiatives, technological innovations, and even grassroots movements aimed at promoting a more sustainable future. Having explored all of this, what stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from this deep dive? What should our listener really be thinking about after hearing all of this?
If I had to distill it down to one key point, I'd say it's this. India's approach to climate change and energy transition is a masterclass in pragmatism. They're not shying away from the challenges, but they're also not letting idealism cloud their judgment.
I see.
They're taking a realistic look at their energy needs, their development priorities, and the global political landscape, and crafting solutions that work within those constraints.
So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. And it's a delicate one. But I think the chapter makes a compelling case that this pragmatic approach is not only necessary for India, but it could also serve as a model for other developing countries navigating this complex transition.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We often hear about these ambitious climate targets and grand pronouncements. But what's often missing is that grounded, practical understanding of how to actually make those targets a reality in the real world.
And I think that's where India's approach really shines. They're demonstrating that you can be ambitious about climate action without sacrificing your development goals. They're proving that it's possible to embrace new technologies and innovative solutions, while also recognizing the continued importance of existing energy sources, at least for the time being.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to climate change.
What works for one country might not work for another. And that's why it's so crucial to have a diversity of approaches and perspectives in the global conversation on climate action.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. I'm particularly intrigued by this idea that the world needs to move away from a climate emergency narrative and embrace a more balanced approach that focuses on both near-term well-being and long-term sustainability.
I think that's a really important point. While the urgency of climate change is undeniable, framing it as an emergency can sometimes lead to hasty decisions and unintended consequences, particularly for developing countries.
So it's about finding a path that's both effective,
Speaker, right? It's about finding a path that's both effective and equitable.
Right.
A path that doesn't leave anyone behind. And that's why India's approach with this focus on balancing those development aspirations with climate action is so relevant.
One thing that really struck me was the sheer scope of India's initiatives.
Yeah.
They're not just implementing domestic policies.
Right.
They're also leading these international efforts
to
promote renewable energy, build climate resilience, and even reshape the global financial system to better support sustainable development.
It's clear they're taking a very proactive and multifaceted approach to this challenge, recognizing that addressing climate change requires action on multiple fronts.
So what's the final takeaway for our listener? What should they be mulling over after this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the transition to a low-carbon future is complex.
Yeah.
It's messy and it's full of trade-offs. There's no easy solution, no silver bullet. But India's experience shows that it's possible to make progress, to balance those competing priorities and to find solutions that work in the real world.
Yeah.
It also highlights the crucial role of innovation, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom in shaping a more sustainable and equitable future.
And as India continues on this path, it's going to be fascinating to watch how their approach evolves and what lessons other countries can learn from their experience.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe India's model of pragmatic climate action will become a blueprint for a more sustainable and inclusive global energy transition.
Something to ponder, for sure. And on that note, we'll leave you to explore the links and resources we've provided to learn more about the initiatives and themes that piqued your interest. Until next time, keep diving.
Yeah, and equitable, right?
Right.
A path that doesn't leave anyone behind. And that's why India's approach, with its focus on balancing those development aspirations with climate action, is so relevant.
One thing that really struck me was the sheer scope of India's initiatives.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just implementing domestic policies. They're also leading these international efforts to promote renewable energy, build climate resilience, and even reshape the global financial system to better support sustainable development.
It's clear that they're taking a very proactive and multifaceted approach to this challenge, recognizing that addressing climate change requires action on multiple fronts.
So what's the final takeaway for our listener? What should they be mulling over after this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the transition to a low-carbon future is complex. It's messy and it's full of trade-offs. There's no easy solution, no silver bullet.
Right.
But India's experience shows that it's possible to make progress, to balance those competing priorities, and to find solutions that work in the real world. It also highlights the crucial role of innovation, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom in shaping a more sustainable and equitable future.
And as India continues on this path, it's going to be fascinating to watch how their approach evolves and what lessons other countries can learn from their experience.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe India's model of pragmatic climate action will become a blueprint for a more sustainable and inclusive global energy transition.
Something to ponder, for sure. And on that note, we'll leave you to explore the links and resources we've provided to learn more about the initiatives and themes that piqued your interest. Until next time, keep diving.